So with 16, so we had 15, we had 15, 16, and 17. And these are all half angles. So whenever we do this, remember that we've got to set it up as far as like, this is the angle that we're given, okay, to start. This is where, okay, everything's happening. So from pi over 2 to pi, where's pi over 2 to pi? Quadrant 2, right? So whenever you're in quadrant 2, like I would even put somewhere over here that, remember, that sine is positive and cosine is going to be negative. Okay? Because that's going to come into play at some point. So then the third part of cosine of alpha over 2, this is basically like, this is the formula that I'm going to use. Okay, right here. So if that's the formula, then I'm going to go ahead and write it out first, and then I'll come back and do everything else. So if I'm going to use the half angle formula, there's only one option that I have. So it's going to be cosine of alpha over 2 is equal to the square root. It's either going to be a plus or a minus. I've got to figure that out in just a second. 1 plus cosine of alpha all over 2. Now, I can go ahead and figure out what this is going to be, because what did we already put right here? What is cosine going to be? Is it going to be positive or negative? It's going to be negative, right? So then I can go ahead and get rid of that positive and just make it negative, okay, because it's in quadrant 2. Okay, so again, from here, I need to figure out, I don't have to figure out as much as I do. I need to figure out what, if sine is 9 over 10, remember sine is y over r, so then if I only have one angle, I have alpha, I have x, I have y, and I have r. I know that r is 10, I know that y is 9, x is going to be negative, right? Because what did we do right here? X is negative because cosine is negative. So I've got to figure out what x is. So I'm going to take 10 squared minus 9 squared equals x squared. So 100 minus 81 equals x squared. So 19 equals x squared. So square root of 19. Don't forget to change it to a negative. So then negative square root of 19. That means that my cosine of alpha that I'm going to use in my formula here in a second is just negative square root of 19 over 10. All this number does is basically what's going to replace, it's going to go right there. Alright, so then whenever I run this, negative square root top side is 2, 1 minus, now it's 1 plus, I did not give myself enough room, negative square root of 19 over 10. Now here is when this thing becomes a little hairy. Okay, because I have, and the only reason it becomes a little messy is because I have a square root and then I have a square root underneath the square root. Okay, so what I would do, it's really, the biggest thing with any of these is try not to get frustrated and take your time with it, because what I would suggest doing is, like, I'm going to work this pretty generously in terms of, like, in what I'm going to do. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to turn this 1 into a denominator of 10. So I'm going to have 10 over 10 minus the square root of 19 over 10. And then it all underneath 2. Put the square root around it. Don't forget the negative. Okay? I'm sure at some point I will do that just because I always do. Now, from here, again, I'm going to show you, you can do this from basically from orange to green. Okay, I'm going to turn it into a green one. And you could have done this on the first step that I had in orange. But if I have 10 minus the square root of 19 over 10, and then all of it over 2, and then the square root, all I did was basically just rewrite this here. Oh, I did not do a very good job. I just rewrote that as one fraction. Now, here's your shortcut. Your shortcut is to just, I'm going to have a negative. I'm going to have a square root. What's 10 times 2? 20. Those two become my 20, and then 10 minus the square root of 19. Now, I rewrite this. Okay, I'm just going to kind of move everything. I'm going to go in this direction. I'm going to go down. I'm going to rewrite it as 10 minus the square root of 19. I'm going to split it up, and then the square root of 20. Don't forget the negative. Now, can I leave the square root of 20 on the bottom side? No? What number, what's the best perfect square that I can make that 20? Huh? Yeah, I'm gonna go square root of 5. It's so I can make it 100. You know what I mean? Yeah. So instead of rationalizing it, that's fine if you want to rationalize it, but I'm gonna go square root of 5 and square root of 5. Because whenever I multiply that, that's the square root of 100, which is just gonna be what? The 10, right? Okay. Now, whenever I do this, okay, this is where I feel like this one gets a little bit tricky, is because everything's underneath the square root. So the bottom side, I feel like, is not an issue. So like if I have the square root and I have a negative in front of it, and if I have just it's just going to be over 10, so no square root here, my fault. If I just have the 10, since the 5 is underneath the radical and all of these are, it's really just like 5 times 10. So what's 5 times 10? 50. So it's going to be 50 minus 5 times the square root of 19. Okay, that's my final answer. The biggest thing here is where I lose students or I lose people is, well, that 19's underneath the radical. You're right, it is. Okay, but it's like if that radical up here on top like if this one wasn't, if this radical wasn't there, and this radical wasn't there, I would just do 5 times 10 and get 50, and I would just put the 5 in front just like I did here. Okay? That's where like having 2 square roots kind of really throws everything off. Okay? And like the biggest thing, students want to take that 5 and they want to multiply it with the 19. Because, well, you multiplied the 10, you're right, we did. Okay? But the 19 is a square root under a square root, not just underneath a single square root. Does that make sense?